Do you remember those strange kitchen features? The ones so odd it is hard to believe they ever existed? In 70s and 80s homes, these quirky appliances and designs shaped daily life in ways that felt normal back then. What does it say about us that they vanished without a trace? Avocado green appliances were not just a kitchen trend, they were a statement. From refrigerators to dishwashers, that shade of deep, murky green spread across American homes like wildfire in the 1970s. It was bold, it was earthy, and at the time, it was considered the pinnacle of modern design. Every kitchen magazine showed it off, and every appliance manufacturer offered it. The truth? Not everyone loved it, even then. Some swore the green looked fresh and stylish, while others thought it made their kitchen look like it was stuck in a swamp. Still, avocado green survived for nearly 2 decades, cementing itself as the unofficial color of the era. Moms posed with their brand new refrigerators, proud to show off a color that symbolized progress, even if it clashed horribly with the curtains. Today, the sight of an avocado green stove brings laughter, nostalgia, and maybe a little horror. But back then, it was nothing less than fashionable. Harvest gold ovens were the bold rival of avocado green. If you walked into a kitchen in the 1970s, you were almost guaranteed to find one or the other. Harvest gold was a warm, mustard yellow shade meant to represent optimism and sunshine. It looked sleek in magazine spreads, glowing beneath overhead lights. But in real life, it was a lot of yellow. Some families even joked that everything they cooked looked like it had been dipped in mustard because of the oven's glow. The color was so strong that it often clashed with other kitchen shades, yet people kept buying it because it felt modern. Families gathered around meals cooked in these ovens, their golden color casting an odd glow on every casserole dish. For many, the shade became tied to the smells of meatloaf, pot roast, and Sunday dinners. It was cheerful, yes, but it aged quickly. Within a decade, Harvest Gold went from trendy to tacky, yet no one can deny its place in history, a color that defined the kitchens of an entire generation. Built-in wall phones with 20-foot cords were the lifeline of the kitchen. Mounted to the wall, they often became the command center of the household. Moms cooked while cradling the receiver on their shoulder, stretching that cord across the room as kids ducked underneath. The cords twisted into impossible knots, dangling and bouncing as conversations went on. Privacy? Forget it. Everyone in the house could hear your call, no matter how far you stretched. Kids turned those cords into jump ropes or played limbo under them while moms scolded them to stay out of the way. Untangling the cord became a chore of its own, and some cords stayed twisted forever, no matter how hard you tried. Still, there was comfort in it. The phone was always there, always ringing, always part of the daily kitchen soundtrack. Today, it seems almost absurd to imagine being tethered to a wall just to talk. But for families of the time, the wall phone, with its endlessly tangled cord, was as much a kitchen fixture as the oven. Formica counters with boomerang patterns were the definition of retro cool. Bright laminates covered in swirls and curved shapes turned kitchen counters into works of art. The boomerang design, with its playful arcs and atomic age flair, felt futuristic in the 50s and 60s. It was affordable, easy to clean, and colorful in a way stone or wood never could be. Kitchens in pastel pinks, blues, and greens paired perfectly with the wild counter patterns. Families often bragged about how modern their kitchens looked, even if the counters clashed with everything else in the room. Kids scratched doodles into the surface with forks, and those marks stayed forever, part of the kitchen's history. For kids, it felt like growing up inside a comic book. For parents, it was modern living at its best. Of course, Formica did not last forever. It scratched, burned, and peeled over time. But in its heyday, nothing screamed contemporary kitchen like a boomerang pattern counter gleaming under fluorescent light. Faux brick or stone backsplashes were another strange fad. Made of plastic or thin panels, they promised the look of rustic brick at a fraction of the cost. Families eager to copy the country kitchen style of the 60s installed them by the millions. The result? A wall that looked real from a distance, but up close felt like flimsy plastic. Still, the idea caught on. They were easy enough for dads to install on a weekend, and suddenly every home had its own rustic charm. But over time, they peeled, warped, and sometimes even smelled strange, especially near the stove. Magazines praised them as stylish, affordable, and easy to install. For kids, they were just another backdrop to family meals, unnoticed until the panels began to crack or warp. Today, faux brick is often mocked, but back then, it was an attempt to bring warmth and character into kitchens on a budget. Metal ice cube trays with levers were a cold, clunky reality before plastic trays. You poured water into the metal compartments, slid the tray into the freezer, and waited. But when it was time to get the cubes out, the real struggle began. You had to pull a metal lever, cracking the cubes free with a loud snap. Sometimes it worked perfectly. Other times the cubes shattered into jagged chunks or stuck fast. Kids often yelped when the lever pinched their fingers, and parents cursed when water spilled everywhere during the refill. The trays were heavy, clumsy, and always freezing to the touch, but they felt sturdy compared to later plastic versions. Families argued over who had the muscle to yank the lever, especially when it jammed tight. Still, every clink of those trays hitting a glass of soda was part of daily life. Even with all the hassle, they gave a sense of permanence, like kitchen tools built to last forever. Kids learned to brace themselves for the sound of the lever echoing across the kitchen. They were awkward, noisy, and often painful on the fingers. But for decades, they were the only way to get ice at home. Pull-down recipe holders were a clever invention that now feels like relics. Mounted under cabinets, they had little plastic arms that clipped onto recipe cards. Moms flipped through handwritten index cards, clipped one in place, and followed along while cooking. It kept the card out of spills and splatters, safe from the mess of flour and grease. The design was practical, even ingenious. Many kids remember standing on tiptoe to watch mom clip in a card, squinting at the neat handwriting while the smell of dinner filled the kitchen. Sometimes the holders squeaked as they swung down, adding to the chorus of clattering pots and sizzling pans. Neighbors swapped recipes at church or school, and those cards often ended up clipped under the holder for a week straight. The little arms were surprisingly strong, gripping everything from grease-stained cards to pages torn out of magazines. It was a tiny touch that made the kitchen feel more personal, more lived in. But with cookbooks, magazines, and eventually digital recipes, the pull-down holder faded away. Still, for those who remember, it was an oddly comforting sight, a small helper that made cooking feel organized in a chaotic kitchen. Pull-out cutting boards were another once common feature. Built directly into kitchen cabinetry, these wooden slabs slid out like drawers. They saved counter space and provided a dedicated spot for chopping vegetables or slicing bread. But they came with problems. They absorbed smells, warped with moisture, and stained permanently with every onion or tomato. Some boards became so seasoned with marks and stains that they told a family's entire cooking history. Kids rolled out cookie dough on them, pounding cookie cutters until the wood was scarred with little circles. Dads used them for carving roasts, leaving behind knife grooves and grease stains. The boards often squeaked when pulled out, a familiar sound in every household. Even though they were flawed, they gave kitchens a sense of resourcefulness and tradition. Yet, for families with small kitchens, they were a lifesaver. Kids often remembered rolling out cookie dough on those boards, flour dusting the wood as holiday baking took over the room. Today, the pull-out cutting board has all but vanished, but its memory remains in kitchens that valued function above all else. Lazy Susans in corner cabinets made storage more fun than it had any right to be. Spin the wooden circle, and rows of canned food whirled into view. They squeaked, clattered, and sometimes jammed, but they made the most of awkward cabinet space. Kids loved giving them an extra spin just to watch the cans slide around. Parents loved the convenience, even if the mechanism wore out over time. Sometimes a can would topple off mid-spin, clunking loudly against the cabinet walls, but that never stopped anyone from spinning again. Grandmas filled theirs with spices, while kids begged to see how fast the whole thing could go without knocking food over. Every turn revealed forgotten cans of beans or soup, a little surprise tucked away in storage. Families joked about losing things in the Lazy Susan, only to find them months later on the far side. For all its quirks, it became a little source of entertainment as well as practicality. Lazy Susans were both practical and playful, a kitchen feature that brought a little fun into the daily grind of cooking dinner. Bread drawers with roll-top covers were the finishing touch of a vintage kitchen. Built into cabinets, they kept loaves tucked away neatly, shielded from pests and staleness. The roll-top design made opening and closing them oddly satisfying. Families saw them as a mark of a well-equipped modern kitchen. But over time, bread drawers became unnecessary. Moms loved the way they hid clutter, slipping in not just bread but crackers, cookies, and even lunchbox snacks. Kids loved sliding the cover up and down just for the sound, pretending it was a secret hiding place. Some drawers got stuffed so full that the roll top barely closed, creaking under the pressure of too many loaves. Over time, the covers warped, and crumbs always seemed to collect in the corners no matter how often they were cleaned. Still, they gave kitchens a sense of order, a place where even bread had its own home. Packaged bread lasted longer, freezers took over storage, and counter space became more valuable. Today, bread drawers are rare curiosities, a reminder of a time when every kitchen detail was designed with purpose, even if that purpose eventually disappeared. Hideaway bread boxes were once the secret storage of the kitchen. Instead of the wicker baskets or countertop bins we see today, these boxes were cleverly built right into the counters, hidden under a sliding panel or disguised as part of the cabinetry. Moms would pull open the section, and inside were loaves of white sandwich bread, dinner rolls, or maybe a few sweet buns saved from the bakery. The idea was simple. Bread stayed fresher, out of sight, and away from curious hands. But there was also a touch of pride in having such a sleek, modern feature built right into the kitchen. Bread boxes became part of the ritual of mealtime. Kids would wait as Mom reached into the hidden drawer, pulling out slices for sandwiches or toast. Some even had faint, yeasty smells clinging to them, proof that bread was the true staple of the family table. Of course, bread eventually came sealed tighter, baked to last longer, and stored more easily in pantries or freezers. That meant the hideaway box slowly lost its purpose. Today, you almost never see them, but for anyone who grew up with one, the memory of opening that secret compartment for a slice of bread is still fresh. Tin canisters lined on the counter were more than storage. They were a sign of order. Matching sets, often labeled in bold letters, flour, sugar, coffee, sometimes even tea, were displayed proudly, almost like decorations. They were often made of shiny tin, sometimes painted with cheerful designs or florals, sometimes sleek and silver. Every mom seemed to have a set, and every kid knew exactly which one held the sugar for cereal or the flour for cookies. The lids clicked shut with a satisfying pop, and over time, they grew dented and worn from constant use. These canisters were not just about keeping ingredients fresh. They were about routine. Moms measured from them daily, kids peeked inside when sneaking sugar cubes, and guests always noticed them as part of the kitchen's personality. They gave kitchens a sense of rhythm, where everything had a place, everything was labeled, and everything looked just a little coordinated. By the late 80s, plastic containers and bulk packaging pushed them aside. But those tins, lined in neat rows, will always represent a time when kitchens balanced practicality with a little style on the countertop. In-counter nut grinders were one of those odd little inventions that made kitchens feel more gadget-ready than ever before. Picture this: a small metal crank built right into the counter, waiting for a handful of walnuts, pecans, or peanuts. Moms would drop them in, turn the handle, and watch as finely chopped bits fell directly into cookie dough, pie crust, or Sunday dinner recipes. It was a small, satisfying bit of kitchen engineering. Kids loved turning the crank just to see what came out, sneaking a few ground nuts for themselves. The grinder gave baking a sense of ceremony, like the kitchen was equipped with tools only a professional should have. Of course, it was also messy. Nuts clogged the grinder, crumbs fell everywhere, and sometimes the crank jammed at the worst possible moment. but it was a fun, quirky feature that felt futuristic at the time. As food processors and stand mixers took over, the little nut grinder slowly became obsolete. Still, for anyone who remembers it, the sound of nuts crunching under the crank is tied forever to family kitchens and the smell of cookies baking in the oven. Wall-mounted can openers were a fixture of every mid-century kitchen. Screwed permanently into the wall, usually right next to the fridge or the counter, they were designed so no one would ever misplace them. And they worked. Every family had stacks of canned goods, soup, beans, peaches, vegetables, and those cans were cracked open daily with the clunky metal opener hanging from the wall. Kids learned quickly how to slot the can in and crank it around, listening to the satisfying click as the lid lifted off. They were reliable, always ready, and always visible. But they were not without their quirks. Sometimes the blades dulled, sometimes they sprayed juice when punctured, and sometimes they left sharp edges that cut little fingers. Still, they were dependable, and for decades, no kitchen felt complete without one. Eventually, countertop openers and compact handheld models pushed them out. But for a long stretch of time, that mounted opener was a symbol of kitchen permanence. Practical, heavy-duty, and always hanging right where you needed it. Ice crushers attached to counters made kitchens feel like soda fountains. Clamp the gadget to the edge of a table or counter, pour in cubes from those old metal trays, and crank away. Out came crushed ice, perfect for lemonades, cocktails, or the occasional snow cone on a hot summer afternoon. The whole family gathered around, waiting for the sound of crunching cubes to turn into the fluffy pile of crushed ice. Kids begged for it just to chew on, even when their teeth hurt from the cold. The crusher turned ordinary drinks into something special, whether it was cola poured over ice or a backyard mocktail for mom and dad. Of course, they were messy, noisy, and required elbow grease. Ice flew everywhere, and the little drawer often overflowed. But they were worth it, because in a world without refrigerators that crushed ice automatically, this was as close as you got to fancy. By the time automatic ice dispensers arrived in the 80s, the clamp-on crusher was already a relic. But its memory is tied forever to kitchens that turned the everyday act of crushing ice into family entertainment. Pop-up toaster hoods were one of the strangest, most unnecessary gadgets of the kitchen. The hood was a little metal dome that sat over your toaster, designed to keep toast warm after it popped. In theory, it made sense. If you were busy frying eggs or pouring coffee, your toast would not go cold. But the truth was, the hood trapped steam, and steam meant limp, rubbery bread that no one actually enjoyed. Families would grin through it anyway, convincing themselves it was fancy, because hey, the advertisements promised it worked. Some even called it space age because of its shiny dome design, like something pulled from a rocket ship kitchen. You could almost imagine astronauts eating soggy toast under the same chrome lid. It felt like progress, even when the results were less than appetizing. But in practice, it just made the toast soggy. Still, families bought them, tried them, and laughed about them. Kids watched the toast pop, only for mom to slide the dome over like it was some futuristic food warmer. It looked cool, shiny, and modern, but it never quite worked. Eventually, people realized that buttering the toast right away was the better solution. But for a brief period, toaster hoods were a proud feature of kitchens, a little dome of hope that breakfast could stay warm and perfect, even when life got hectic. Butter warmers built into stoves might be the most indulgent feature kitchens ever had. A small electric slot, usually near the burners, kept a dish of butter soft and ready for spreading. Families used it for toast in the morning, corn on the cob at dinner, or baking sessions that demanded softened butter. It was quirky, but undeniably convenient. Many kitchens treated the little slot like a secret luxury, showing it off to guests as if it was a hidden superpower of the stove. Kids dipped bread corners straight into the softened butter, sneaking tastes when mom's back was turned. The slot became a small but constant reminder that kitchens were trying to be more than just practical. They were meant to feel a little glamorous. It was not about necessity. It was about the joy of having something a little extra. Even if the butter sometimes melted too far and turned into a puddle, families still loved bragging about it. Imagine never having to leave a stick of butter on the counter and guess if it would melt or harden. Your stove did the work for you. Kids loved sneaking a dip of melted butter, while moms swore it made cooking easier. But over time, the feature proved unnecessary. Microwaves, ovens, and even the room temperature itself did the job just fine. Still, the idea of a stove designed with a built-in butter slot shows how much thought went into kitchens of the era. It was strange, yes, but also kind of brilliant. Plate warming racks were another mark of kitchen luxury. Tucked under the oven, these heated drawers kept dinner plates warm until it was time to serve. The logic was simple. Hot food should not sit on a cold plate. Families who had them felt like they were dining at a fine restaurant every night. For big family dinners, moms would load stacks of plates into the rack so everyone could sit down to a steaming meal at once. Guests were always impressed, calling it fancy, even though it was really just a drawer with heat. Still, it made Sunday roasts and Thanksgiving dinners feel like five-star occasions. In some houses, kids even crawled into the empty racks for warmth, though parents scolded them quickly. It was strange, unnecessary, but oddly comforting. Moms loved pulling out warm plates, setting them on the table, and making dinner feel just a little more special. Kids might not have noticed, but adults did. The meal stayed warmer, longer. Of course, the racks also heated up the kitchen, which was not always pleasant in summer. They were also one more appliance part to break. Eventually, they faded as unnecessary add-ons. But for those who had them, they were a little piece of elegance tucked under the oven, a reminder that sometimes kitchens tried to make every dinner feel like an event. Trash compactors in the corner were once considered cutting edge. The idea was futuristic. Instead of throwing away bulky trash, you pressed a button and the machine crushed it into neat, compressed bundles. Families bragged about them, showing off the high-tech feature at dinner parties. It was modern, efficient, and supposedly eco-friendly before that term was even popular. Kids pressed the button just for fun, fascinated by the grinding noise and the smell of trash being crushed. Neighbors peeked into kitchens and marveled at the machine that ate garbage. It felt like living in the future, like kitchens were becoming spaceships with buttons for everything. But the mess and the smell soon outweighed the novelty, and many sat broken in corners after just a few years. For families, the trash compactor became less a miracle and more a punchline. But reality was a little different. The compactors often broke, smelled terrible, and made strange noises. Kids were fascinated watching the machine squash trash, while parents worried it was more trouble than it was worth. They became symbols of excess, kitchens trying too hard to look advanced. Within a decade, most were abandoned, turned into storage spots for brooms, or just left unused. Today, they are nearly extinct, but for a short while, trash compactors represented the dream of a cleaner, neater, more futuristic kitchen. Chrome trim everywhere made kitchens sparkle like diners. From counter edges to table sides, from chairs to appliance doors, chrome was the finishing touch. It shined, reflected light, and made everything look modern and futuristic. Moms polished it constantly, wiping away fingerprints and smudges, while kids traced their faces in the shiny borders. For many families, chrome was not just decoration, it was a sign you had a modern kitchen, one that felt alive and stylish. The sparkle made even the plainest linoleum floors feel a little glamorous. Kids joked that you could check your hair in the chrome before heading out the door. But the shine came at a cost. It scratched easily and dulled fast, turning from glamorous to dingy in a matter of years. Still, for that first gleam after cleaning, chrome was magic. Chrome gave kitchens a sense of optimism, like they were keeping pace with the atomic age. But chrome also showed wear quickly. It scratched, dulled, and sometimes even rusted. Still, when it was gleaming, it made kitchens feel alive, almost glamorous. By the 1970s, the shine dulled as wood finishes and natural tones took over. Yet for decades, chrome trim was everywhere, a shiny symbol of progress that made kitchens feel like they belonged to the future. fluorescent tube lighting above the sink was once the ultimate in modern practicality. Instead of a soft, warm bulb glowing in the ceiling, kitchens of the 1960s and 70s often had long fluorescent tubes buzzing above the sink or counters. They promised efficiency, brightness, and a clean, futuristic look. But in reality, they cast a cold, bluish light that made everything look a little off, like you were washing dishes in a hospital rather than at home. The tubes hummed constantly, sometimes flickering just enough to drive you crazy. Kids joked that the lights made dinner look green, and moms hated the way they emphasized every dirty spot on the dishes. Still, they were popular for years, sold as the ultimate upgrade from old incandescent fixtures. What people remember most was the sound, an electric buzz that seemed to echo through the kitchen, becoming the background noise of late-night dishwashing. Sometimes the tubes burned out unevenly, leaving one end bright and the other dim, casting strange shadows over the sink. Over time, homeowners realized that the modern look was more clinical than cozy. By the 1980s, warmer track lighting and recessed fixtures began to take over. Today, fluorescent tubes above the sink have all but vanished, remembered as one of those strange choices that seemed like progress at the time but left kitchens feeling more like offices than homes. Accordion-style folding doors for pantries were another odd feature that once seemed stylish but quickly wore out their welcome. These doors were made of lightweight plastic, designed to fold back and forth like a concertina, hiding shelves of food behind them. At first glance, they looked modern, space-saving, and flexible. But anyone who lived with them remembers the problems. They cracked easily, bent out of shape, and often came off their tracks. Kids loved yanking them open with a dramatic flair, only to leave them jammed halfway or dangling off one side. The plastic had a distinct smell, especially when the kitchen got warm, and the slats made a constant clicking noise when moved. They never really kept the pantry sealed, and sometimes they pinched fingers if you were not careful. Still, accordion doors were everywhere, used not just for pantries but for laundry rooms and even closets. They were cheap, easy to install, and matched the push for modern modular designs in the 1960s and 70s. Eventually, though, people traded them in for sturdier hinged doors or sliding panels. Today, accordion pantry doors are a forgotten relic, quirky, frustrating, and strangely nostalgic for anyone who remembers rummaging through a pantry while trying not to break the flimsy plastic panels. Knee-knocker drop-leaf tables were a fixture in countless kitchens, designed to save space but remembered mostly for their inconvenience. These tables had fold-down sides that could be lifted up when extra guests arrived or dropped when you wanted more room. On paper, they were brilliant, compact, flexible, and family-friendly. In practice, they were traps. Kids crawling under the table constantly hit their heads on the heavy wood flaps, and adults sitting too close found their knees banged every time someone shifted the leaf. The hinges squeaked, the latches stuck, and sooner or later, one side always sagged. Still, families made the most of them. Moms loved being able to squeeze a table into small kitchens, unfolding the sides for Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings. Drop-leaf tables doubled as homework desks, sewing stations, and even makeshift buffets during parties. But they were heavy, awkward, and always in the way at the worst possible time. As kitchens grew larger and dining rooms more open, the drop-leaf slowly disappeared. Today, they survive mostly as antiques or garage sale finds, remembered fondly for their practicality, but cursed for the bruises they left behind. Vinyl padded chairs at the kitchen table were as common as the smell of bacon in the morning. Shiny vinyl stretched over cushioned seats, nailed down tight with silver tacks, and perched on chrome or wooden frames. They came in bright colors, reds, yellows, greens, that matched the bold kitchens of the era. They looked cheerful, modern, and inviting. But in summer, they stuck to bare legs like glue. Kids dreaded standing up from the table after breakfast, leaving behind the imprint of the chair on the backs of their thighs. Cracks appeared over time, little rips that exposed the yellow foam inside, which always seemed to spill out no matter how often moms taped it back together. Still, those chairs were durable, easy to wipe down, and affordable, which made them perfect for families on a budget. Spaghetti sauce wiped right off, spilled milk left no stain, and kids could climb all over them without worry. But the squeaks, the sticking, and the eventual peeling vinyl gave them a reputation as cheap rather than chic. By the 1980s, fabric cushions and wood chairs began to replace them. Yet, for those who grew up in the vinyl era, the memory of sitting on a hot summer day, legs glued to the chair, is unforgettable. Ceiling-hung wooden pot racks were one of the boldest and strangest kitchen trends to sweep through homes. Instead of stacking pans and cabinets, families proudly hung them from heavy racks suspended over kitchen islands or even dining tables. It looked rustic, professional, and just a little bit showy. Guests would walk in and immediately notice the gleaming copper pans or cast iron skillets dangling overhead, but in practice the racks had issues. They collected dust, they swung around if you bumped into them, and they were dangerous if a pan slipped loose. More than one family remembers the crash of a skillet falling mid-dinner, narrowly missing someone's plate. Kids hated them because they always felt like the pots were looming overhead, ready to tumble down. Moms tolerated them because they freed up cabinet space and made the kitchen feel gourmet. For a time, the hanging rack was considered a mark of sophistication, a sign that you were serious about cooking. But as open floor plans and sleeker designs took over, the bulky wooden racks looked dated. Today, they are rarely seen outside of old houses or trendy restaurants. For those who lived with them, though, the memory of ducking under a swinging pan just to get to the fridge is impossible to forget. There is something magical about walking past a house that looks like it was pulled straight from a fairy tale. Tiny turrets, swooping rooftops, crooked chimneys. It is like Hansel and Gretel got into real estate. These were the Storybook houses. They first showed up in the 1920s, a kind of architectural comfort blanket after the trauma of World War I. But they got a strange little second wind in the post-World War II boom, when developers started trying to add whimsy to the new suburbs. These homes were fantasy made real, full of charm and detail that did not need to be there, but made you smile anyway. The doors were arched, the windows had diamond panes. Everything looked slightly askew, but in the best possible way. Inside, you might find wood-beamed ceilings, built-in reading nooks, and fireplaces that looked like something out of a medieval inn. The whole idea was to make life feel softer, safer, a little more enchanted. But magic has a price. These homes were expensive to build and even harder to repair. Every curved roofline, every decorative flourish meant extra work. And as America leaned further into sleek minimalism and mass production, there just was not room for this much personality anymore. Builders dropped them, buyers stopped looking, and slowly these homes disappeared from the blueprint. Today, they are beloved oddities, preserved in pockets of old neighborhoods or snapped up by nostalgia-loving renovators. They are strange, beautiful, and completely impractical. But for one moment in time, people believed in fairy tales and then lived in them. If you lived through the 1970s, you remember the feel of it between your toes. Shag carpeting was more than a design choice, it was a movement. Bold colors, thick fibers, and the kind of plush softness that made you want to lie down and never get up. From mustard yellows to burnt oranges, it blanketed floors in every room, including bathrooms, which is an idea no one has really been able to explain. Shag was fun and funky, but it was also a magnet for everything you never wanted in your house. Dust, dirt, pet hair, smells. And once it was in there, it stayed. Vacuuming was a chore. Deep cleaning was a nightmare. The very feature that made shag carpet so appealing, its thick, luxurious texture, was exactly what made it impossible to clean. People were not just pulling it up for new trends, they were trying to reclaim their air quality. What started as a symbol of comfort quickly became a maintenance disaster. Eventually, people tore it up in favor of cleaner, sleeker options. Shag rugs might have made a small comeback, but the wall-to-wall version? It is staying in the past, where it belongs. Of course, nothing trapped dust or the mood of a dark, cramped house, quite like what was hanging on the walls. The electric egg poacher was the quiet champion of a better breakfast. Small, unassuming, and often overlooked, it sat tucked away in the corners of countertops, promising soft whites and warm yolks without a pot or pan in sight. You filled the base with water, cracked your eggs into the holders, and watched the steam rise slowly into a gentle cloud. It was perfect for those who wanted elegance without the effort. No vinegar, no swirling water, no chance of a ruined yolk. Just press the button and walk away. In a world full of toasters and coffee makers, it whispered, "Take your time." It belonged to the kind of home that played soft jazz on Sunday mornings and served breakfast on ceramic plates instead of paper towels. The poacher did not need to be flashy. It was consistent. It gave people back their mornings. And yet, it faded. Because poached eggs stopped being everyday meals. Because we forgot how nice it was to feel fancy before 9 in the morning. Now, most sit in thrift shops, unused and unappreciated. But for those who remember, one bite of that perfectly poached egg takes them straight back. When did we decide breakfast was no longer worth slowing down for? Pull-down desks were supposed to be a dream come true for small homes. They looked clean, folded flush against the wall, and promised a pop-out workspace anytime you needed one. But once you actually started using them, the problems appeared fast. Hinges creaked, the desktop wobbled, and if you tried to put any real weight on it, like a typewriter or even a stack of books, it sagged. The latch mechanisms often wore out, making them hard to open or harder to keep shut. Some desks never sat flat, making writing or typing feel like working on a tilted tray. Others developed permanent lean from years of being overloaded with just a little more than they could handle. Most were too small to be useful, barely big enough for a notebook and a lamp, and if you ever forgot to fold it back up, it became a shin-height tripping hazard. Over time, people stopped using them altogether. Some turned into junk mail stations, others got blocked by furniture and forgotten. The dream of functional minimalism collapsed under the weight of poor craftsmanship. But at least a bad desk could be avoided. The next trend was something you literally had to sleep on, even when it stopped working. Tile countertops used to be the envy of every stylish post-war kitchen. Bright turquoise, sunny yellow, or soft pink ceramic tiles lined the counters like a checkerboard of domestic optimism. But the secret every home cook knew was this: those grout lines were a menace. They absorbed spills, caught crumbs, and stained faster than you could scrub. You might as well have been cooking on a tiled floor. Still, people loved the look. It felt cheerful, polished, and clean, at least at first glance. The tiles were cool to the touch and easy to replace if one chipped. You wiped them down after every meal, but somehow they still told the story of every spill and every stir. Those stains were not just grime, they were memories set in stone. But no matter how often you scrubbed with baking soda and vinegar, the grout lines always seemed a shade darker than the day before. Eventually, the shine wore off. Laminate, granite, and seamless solid surfaces took over. You could wipe once and be done. No more grout brushes, no more bleach, but something about those tile counters still lingers in the memory. They were imperfect, yes, but also warm and lived in. Kitchens where birthday cakes were frosted and Sunday gravy simmered for hours. When did spotless surfaces become more important than stories? At first glance, a butterfly roof looks like a mistake. The roof dips down in the middle and slopes upward at both ends, like a V turned on its side. But back in the mid-1900s, this odd design was considered cutting edge. It was modern, dramatic, and perfect for California's desert light. Architects loved it because it gave houses a kind of futuristic flair, almost like they were in motion. It also had practical appeal. The inward slope helped collect rainwater, and the tall outer edges made it easy to install massive windows without compromising shade. It was smart, stylish, and for a few years, everyone wanted one. But then came the rain and the leaks. Turns out those inward slopes were excellent at trapping water, until the drainage systems failed. Suddenly, people had waterfalls in their living rooms. And those tall walls? Great for privacy, terrible for airflow. Heating and cooling became a nightmare. Contractors started refusing to build them. Insurance companies got wary. And just like that, the butterfly roof crashed. Most of the homes were remodeled or flattened out entirely, losing their original charm in the process. A few brave homeowners kept theirs intact, but today they stand out like punctuation marks in a paragraph of plain boxes. The butterfly roof was ambitious. It wanted to fly. But in the end, it fell victim to the one thing every house has to face eventually: gravity. The electric hot plate built into the countertop was not meant to replace the stove. It was there for the in-between moments, the simmering, the reheating, the lonely cup of soup on a gray afternoon. It looked like a single stovetop coil embedded right into the counter, usually near the sink or beside the coffee station. You turned the knob and it glowed red. No pots stacked on burners, no full stove required. For single servings or quick boils, it was perfect. They became especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s during the height of the modern kitchen boom. They were sleek, functional, and felt futuristic. But they came with risks. Open coils got hot fast, stayed hot longer, and were sometimes forgotten. Over time, homeowners chose to have more counter space instead. The coils vanished, replaced with cutting boards and clean surfaces. But those hot plates once stood for independence, the idea that a small meal still mattered, that a house could be big, but one burner could still feel like home. What part of the kitchen did we lose when we made everything smooth? Chain-link curtains swept into homes with all the glitz of a disco ball. Made of dangling metal loops, they sparkled, shimmered, and promised a modern, open-concept elegance that felt straight off the pages of a designer catalog. They were hung as room dividers, doorway accents, or even statement walls. The problem was, they never quite worked as advertised. The links tangled constantly. They snagged on sweaters, jewelry, and even hair. Pets would get stuck in them. Toddlers could pull them down. And for something that looked so sleek in showrooms, they sounded awful. Every movement produced a rattling metallic hiss, like someone jangling keys for attention. Cleaning was next to impossible. Dust clung to the chains like it had paid rent, and good luck wiping down hundreds of tiny metal rings. Over time, the shine wore off, the links dulled, and the novelty wore thin. What had once been stylish soon felt like living inside a giant wind chime. But just as these decorative dividers were quietly being retired, another trend had already taken root in suburban basements, one that involved steam, sweat, and a surprisingly low return on investment. The cookie press was a piece of holiday magic that turned dough into art with nothing but a squeeze. With its interchangeable metal discs and ratchet-style handle, it could create dozens of perfect cookies in seconds, each one shaped like a flower, star, or tree. It was especially popular during the holiday season, when kitchens smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, and the radio played old Christmas tunes. The press made baking feel like a celebration. Kids would fight over who got to press the dough, and every batch felt like a tiny miracle. No rolling pin, no cookie cutter. Just one graceful push, and a perfect cookie appeared. The dough was usually soft and buttery, flavored with almond or lemon, and finished with a dusting of sugar or colored sprinkles. The cookie press was about more than efficiency. It was about beauty. It said your cookies could be delicious and delightful, but as store-bought cookies became more common, and as baking turned into a rare weekend chore instead of a family tradition, the press went quiet. It sits in the backs of drawers now, its discs scattered and forgotten. But for those who remember, it was a joy machine. When did we stop making food that felt like play? At first glance, you might not even know there was a house there. Just a grassy hill with maybe a door peeking out from the side like something out of a Hobbit story. But in the 1970s, underground earth-sheltered homes were seen as the smartest, most sustainable way to live. The energy crisis had people scrambling for answers, and burying your house beneath dirt seemed like a pretty decent one. These homes stayed cool in summer, warm in winter, and required very little energy to regulate temperature. That was the pitch, and for many, it worked, at least for a while. The idea was to blend in with the earth, to make homes that did not disrupt nature but became part of it. Builders carved them into hillsides or built berms around them. The roofs were often covered in grass, flowers, or even small gardens. But here is where things got complicated. Ventilation was tricky, mold was common, and the interior layouts felt more like bunkers than homes. Natural light was limited unless you spent a fortune on custom skylights or glass walls. And let's not forget water damage. When it rains and your roof is literally soil, things can get messy fast. People were enchanted by the promise of these homes, but often overwhelmed by the upkeep. Still, for a brief moment in architectural history, the idea of hiding your home in plain sight felt revolutionary. And though most of these homes have been abandoned, filled in, or built over, they left behind a quiet question. What if living closer to the earth meant literally living inside it? Before open concept became the norm, the kitchen pass-through window was the perfect compromise. It was a small rectangular opening in the wall, usually with a sliding panel or shutters, that connected the kitchen to the dining room. You could serve dishes straight through, peek out to check on guests, or whisper a message without leaving your post at the stove. It was functional and a little bit fun, like a drive-through for your own home. Kids loved it because it felt like a secret door. Adults loved it because it saved steps. These pass-throughs became iconic in mid-century ranch homes and suburban houses. But as walls came down and kitchens turned into wide-open living spaces, the humble pass-through lost its purpose. Some were plastered over during remodels. Others became awkward holes in drywall with no clear use. But once, they made kitchens feel like command centers, like you could be in two rooms at once. What did we gain when we knocked down those walls? And what subtle joys did we lose? Built-in intercom systems were supposed to be the future. Press a button in the kitchen, and you could talk to someone 2 rooms away. No yelling, no walking upstairs, just crystal clear communication across your house. Except, not really. These systems were clunky, ugly, and often broken. The audio quality was closer to a drive-through speaker than anything futuristic. Static, echoes, and random bursts of feedback became the norm, and when they did work, it often felt like you were eavesdropping more than talking. Even as a novelty, the intercom felt outdated within a few years, replaced by cordless phones and then home cell lines. What was once cutting-edge quickly became awkward background noise. People quickly realized that a cordless phone, or just walking down the hall, was faster and less frustrating. Within a decade, these systems went from high-end status symbols to forgotten wall boxes gathering dust. Some were hidden behind art, others were ripped out entirely. But if avocado green had a twin in tragedy, it was coming next. A color so bold, so sunny, and so divisive that it burned itself into America's kitchen memory forever. Jell-O molds were not just recipes, they were performances. In the 1950s and 1960s, these shimmering towers of gelatin were the pride of dinner tables and potlucks alike. Suspended inside were slices of fruit, vegetables, nuts, and sometimes even meats, frozen in mid-dance by the wobble of lemon or lime gelatin. The molds themselves were often metal, shaped like flowers, domes, or decorative rings. Housewives practiced their releases with reverence, praying the mold would slide out cleanly with a satisfying thwack. The result? A glossy, surreal centerpiece. Guests gasped, children poked. Recipes were passed from neighbor to neighbor, each claiming their version was best. But these creations were not just about looks. Jell-O was cheap, shelf-stable, and forgiving. It let families stretch their ingredients during lean times. It made leftovers glamorous, and it brought a little joy to a time when people needed something bright and strange and wonderful. Eventually, tastes changed. Molds disappeared into cabinets. Jell-O became a snack cup. But for decades, it was art, it was pride, and it was love in a ring-shaped dish. When did we stop celebrating the food that made us smile before it ever touched our lips? Faux exposed brick was the fast track to urban chic in the 1970s. You could find it in basements, kitchens, and even living rooms, thin brick veneers glued to drywall, or worse, vinyl panels printed with brick patterns. It gave the illusion of raw, industrial charm without the cost of actual masonry. But like most shortcuts, it did not hold up. Over time, the adhesive failed. Corners peeled, edges warped. In some cases, entire sheets of faux brick would fall off the wall, revealing the cheap drywall behind it and killing the illusion in one thud. What was sold as rugged and timeless turned out to be fragile and temporary. Nothing more than a costume for the house. What once looked trendy now looked like a half-finished stage set. Some panels were so thin they cracked if you leaned on them. And cleaning them? A nightmare. Dust settled in every fake mortar line, and trying to repaint them only made them look more artificial. The charm wore off fast, leaving behind a wall that was too fragile to save and too expensive to redo properly. People wanted the character of a loft without the upkeep of a real brick wall, and what they got was crumbling plastic in a shade called rust red. But if fake brick left your walls feeling hollow, the next design choice made your whole house feel cold, starting with the hearth. Imagine opening your cabinet to plan dinner and seeing a chalkboard right on the inside of the door. Some even had pull-down recipe scrolls made of parchment or linen, mounted like an old-fashioned map. You could write a grocery list, the day's menu, or a reminder that your mother-in-law was coming over. These weren't just novelty features, they were part of how a kitchen thought out loud. In a time before smartphones or sticky notes, these were the planners, the notepads, the command centers of the kitchen, and they told a story. In chalk dust and grease smudges, you could see a family's week unfold. Sometimes the writing faded, but the memory of it never did. It was handwriting that knew your routines better than you did. Eventually, they faded out. Whiteboards came in, then apps, then voice memos. Cupboards no longer had messages waiting. Now, kitchens are silent and glossy, all smooth wood and cold steel. No one scribbles meatloaf tonight inside a drawer anymore. The charm is gone, and so is the handwriting. But in old kitchens, those chalk smears still whisper what once was. When did we stop writing things down where it mattered most? If you have ever walked past a house that looked suspiciously like a giant dishwasher, you may have seen a Lustron. These prefab steel homes were built after World War II to solve the post-war housing shortage. And they were unlike anything else. Every panel, every wall, every ceiling, made of enamel-coated steel. You could literally clean the walls with a sponge. No paint, no termites, no nonsense. They were designed to be fireproof, easy to maintain, and fast to build. The idea was genius. Put these together like a kit, and suddenly America had affordable homes that would last forever. But forever turned out to be a lot shorter than people hoped. The look was divisive. Some folks loved the sleek, modern vibe. Others said it felt like living in a glorified appliance. And then there were the sounds. Every clink of a spoon, every drop of rain echoed like a marching band. Worse, the company behind them ran into major red tape and funding issues. Only about 2,500 Lustrons were ever made before the whole thing collapsed. Today, a few still survive, usually lovingly restored by people obsessed with mid-century oddities. They are cold in the winter, loud in the rain, and nearly impossible to update without a welder. But they were bold, functional, and weirdly beautiful in a living inside a toaster kind of way. Behind the smooth cabinet doors of many mid-century kitchens hid a surprising tool, a pull-out dish drainer that lived inside the wall. After washing dishes, you would slide out the rack, load it up, and let everything drip dry behind closed doors. It kept counters clear, made the kitchen look tidy, and gave a sense of order that matched the rest of the house. Some even had small trays underneath to catch the water. It was not about hiding the mess, it was about making space feel peaceful. When plastic racks and countertop drainers became standard, these hidden drying systems quietly disappeared. New kitchens no longer had room for them, and they were hard to clean and prone to mold. But there was something thoughtful about them, something neat, something kind of charming. Now, we just pile dishes in the sink or leave them out for hours. The idea of drying dishes out of sight feels like something from a different era, one where appearances mattered, but so did small comforts. What else have we stopped tucking away for the sake of convenience? Pea gravel patios looked charming in home improvement magazines, rustic, effortless, a little slice of the French countryside dropped into a suburban backyard. But once they were installed, the reality quickly set in. These patios were nothing more than a layer of loose, sharp-edged stones that never stayed in place. Chairs sank into them, tables wobbled, and walking barefoot was out of the question unless you had calluses like leather. Every breeze sent pebbles scattering into the grass, and lawnmowers did not take kindly to rogue gravel. Kids hated playing on it, pets tracked it indoors, and any kind of sweeping or raking turned into a full-blown yard battle. Even worse, the so-called drainage benefits rarely worked out, leaving the area soggy in winter and scorched in summer. Within a year, most patios looked patchy and uneven, like a poorly maintained construction site rather than a space for relaxation. Homeowners tried tamping the gravel down, adding edging, even gluing it in place, but nothing made it better. It was a great idea in theory, undone by the simplest problem: gravel rolls and people fall. Still, even inside the house, that same mix of fashion and frustration kept showing up, especially in the form of a curtain that was not quite a wall and not quite anything useful at all. The hand crank egg beater was a rite of passage. Long before mixers plugged into walls, children stood on stools beside their mothers, gripping the cool metal handle and turning the crank with both hands. The beaters would spin in a blur, blending sugar, eggs, and flour into the thick beginnings of birthday cakes and pancake batter. It was not efficient, but it was intimate. You felt the recipe coming together. Your arms grew sore, but your heart grew full. The egg beater did not make noise. It did not break. It did not ask for anything but effort. Every kitchen had one, usually tucked in a drawer next to the wooden spoons and measuring cups. Its clinking metal gears were as familiar as the smell of vanilla extract. And somehow, everything tasted better when it had been beaten by hand. Then came stand mixers, food processors, and digital timers. The crank beater was cast aside as outdated, inconvenient, old. But in that loss, something human disappeared. Now it hangs on antique shop walls, a symbol of effort, patience, and care. It taught us that food was not just made, it was earned. Why did we stop believing that some things are better when you feel them in your bones? Take a look at an old Octagon house and your brain might freeze for a second. It is not quite round, not quite square. Just 8 flat sides forming something that looks like a stop sign you could live in. This style first hit the American scene way back in the 1800s, but it had a strange revival during the mid-1900s, especially in the 1960s and 1970s when alternative living was having a moment. The thinking behind it was surprisingly practical. More walls meant more windows meant more sunlight. That meant healthier living, at least according to Orson Squire Fowler, the man who originally championed the design. And he was not wrong. These homes were bright, airy, and oddly calming on the inside. The symmetry gave them a certain balance, but they were also disorienting. Rooms were hard to furnish. Doors and hallways rarely lined up the way you expected. And let's be honest, try explaining to a contractor why you want your new home shaped like a giant polygon. Most people had no idea how to build or renovate them. They confused guests. They confused builders. And eventually, they just quietly vanished from the housing market. Today, a handful of Octagon houses still stand, many of them converted into museums, bed and breakfasts, or historical landmarks. But as a regular family home, they just never stuck. Still, there is something about them that feels noble. They tried to rewrite the rules. And for that alone, they earned their place in the weird, wonderful history of American housing. The bread box was once as essential to the kitchen as the sink or the stove. A humble wooden or metal container, usually perched at the back of the counter, it kept loaves fresh in the days before plastic bags and preservatives took over. Its job was simple: slow down staleness and keep out pests. But its presence meant more than that. It meant you baked or bought bread regularly, that someone in the house cared about toast, sandwiches, or buttered slices to go with stew. Opening the lid released the faintest scent of yeast and crust. For kids, it was the treasure chest of after-school snacks. For adults, it was a silent reminder that home meant warmth. The sound of the lid closing, soft, final, was part of the rhythm of daily life. Bread boxes came in colors to match tiled kitchens and Formica counters. They had floral decals, chrome handles, and rounded corners that looked almost cheerful. Over time, though, as preservatives lengthened shelf lives and bread became an afterthought, the box disappeared. Modern kitchens left no room for something so quaint. But in losing it, we lost a ritual. A quiet pause in the day. When did bread stop deserving a place of its own? So tell me, which of these strange kitchen relics do you secretly miss and which can stay gone forever? Drop your memories in the comments, give this video a thumbs up if it made you smile, and hit subscribe so we can keep cooking up nostalgia together.